labeled on these 3 players that are playing a console game, and then a fence there, and then this really big dude like looking over the fence with NCAA on it.
Oh,
like,
right.
At him,
Yeah.
what they're doing. Just stuff like
Old
that.
political cartoon
Yeah,
style.
yeah, political cartoon stuff.
I like it. That's cool. I will mention one thing that I'm discovering, and I say to
Is
the
mic on? Do you know it's mic 2?
what?
Do you know if it's mic 2?
I've got them all 3 on.
Oh, okay.
So, but that based on
There's music going.
Is it beyond?
It might be distracting.
No, that just when we made the kind of the head coach GM change, it actually empowered me to do things that I didn't think I would need to do, but have totally had to do. Which is, I remind them that I'm not your strategic coach, but I am your communication coach, and you're gonna use the communication strategies. You're gonna curb stuff that doesn't have value. We'll get buy-in from coaches and stuff like that, but that's and I'm always gonna be working on your head. The psychology of it. We've been spending a lot of time just talking about flow theory.
That's what we're experts at.
Exactly. So
Yeah. So there's no other resource that you could go to that's going to say something different. Like, I'm actually the expert in this.
yeah,
So
Exactly.
this is the deal.
exactly. And so so when I'm in your game, and that's assessment. That's what I do.
Yeah.
So it was super helpful, and I sent late last night. I sent Maggie a message, and they all left frustrated. And the message was essentially, things feel hard because they are hard. That we're struggling with these things. We're having to work on communication. All of these things, yes, are true, and they'll get better. They'll get better incrementally. Some of them will just almost disappear overnight. Some of them will struggle with, as long as you're here, trying to get better at. But the kicker of this is, you have our full confidence. You have our full respect and trust and support. You have, you are a leader. And so I say, in preparation for this, I'm trying to set our mindset. In preparation for this final big push of a week, I have to get better at what I do. You have to get better at what you do. We're going to ask everyone else to get better at their jobs as well. But it starts with me. It goes immediately to you. That we all have to have this. We got to do what we do better in order to get as much out of this last week as we can. And she was so appreciative of that. Trying to install that, change begins with me kind of mentality rather than the blame game, which is what's been happening a lot. And you've got a meeting coming up with
Calvin.
Yeah.
So we got a few
Okay.
minutes.
so.
You can do this.
Anyways, that's just bring you up to speed on that. It was good. No, it was good. It was a tough one. Yeah, we're recording.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Leslie, if you're already transcribing, you can start transcribing it now.
Yeah. So
And-
college handouts for players. I'm totally against them. We don't give handouts to players.
By the way, do you prefer college esports or collegiate esports?
It's
Like for the book title even. Do you want it college
Oh.
esports or collegiate esports? I was thinking college esports may even be better, a little more meat and potatoes
yeah.
than collegiate.
Yeah, you know me. I like my starches and my proteins.
College esports.
Mhm.
What you need to know.
That's right.
Like a Uncle Sam kind of thing.
Could it be a pop-up book when the finger comes out?
You know what needs to be a pop-up book is the Collegiate Handbook, or the College Handbook for
Yeah.
players. So let's talk about the College Handbooks
Yep.
for players. This is probably the single most important document you're going to have. Maybe on the side of your charter that gives you the recognition from the university that, yes, you are the official esports varsity program for
Yep.
your university or school. The next best thing, and I think this applies all the way down through high school, and multi-layers. Anytime you have, an organized group of esports team that's representing something, having a handbook's a good idea.
Yep, I agree. And a lot of these players may not have necessarily ever had a traditional sports and a traditional team experience.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing more and more students now that didn't play soccer or football or haven't for such a long time that they don't remember team code and dynamics and what you do affects everyone else and your responsibility.
Right. Some of them have no experience of being as part of a team. This is a new experience, and they also have never been beholden to a hierarchy or a structure in which, yes, you are responsible for your individual actions because they reflect on the entire organization. So here is their first introduction to that for most folks. And, these are kids coming in 17, 18 years old, so it's not surprising that this is new to them.
And this document doesn't replace responsibility training, but it outlines the curriculum and the expectations.
Absolutely. So what guidelines go into your handbook? And we have created one. Your first resource of a good one to borrow, as we've said before, is if you have an athletic handbook or guideline, that's a good one to start with. Does it need to be modified? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in partly because there is information within the athletic handbook because they are NCAA regulated that may not apply to your esports teams.
Correct.
However, most of those guidelines are good to have, and the resources provided are important as well. So those things may include the codes of conduct.
Yep.
There's
often a student code of the university.
Absolutely.
Expectations for all students.
And that's good to reiterate here. If there's an additional one that your athletic department has adopted, something, we have one that emphasizes integrity. And what does it mean to be integrity? What does it mean to represent your school at an event, which normal students don't have to adhere to? But of course, there's the honesty. There's the responsibility.
It's a statement of cultural value. They're a part of a culture that they may not have been an active citizen of before, and they need to know what that culture expects and what that culture wants. And they have the ability, after reading something like this, to go, I'm not interested in that. But it's part of the contract to be part of the team. It's not suggestions. It is a document which tells them exactly what people who are part of your team, whether it be esports or soccer, are expected to do. And if they don't meet those expectations,
right. So in terms of contract, the legality of that, that's something, again, these handbooks are to be reviewed by whatever legal resource you have for your college and campus, have it be reviewed and approved by those bodies. Again, I hesitate to use the word contract, even though it feels as such, because they should have a page at the very end of the handbook from each player that they turn in that says they have received a copy of the handbook. They acknowledge that they're acknowledging the contents of it, and they are saying that they understand what the contents are, because there are the rules, regulations, and consequences. So after the code of conduct, it's a good idea then to start including rules and the consequences for breaking those rules. This may include a wide variety of topics, including resources where you go with grievances, the resources that they have when they have any sorts of questions or concerns or any questions as to interpretation of what those codes of conduct are.
Part of that in that code of conduct is responsibility and ethics in most of these. What do you do if you suspect that one of your teammates is suffering from depression or might want to harm themselves? Those are all wrapped up into those pieces. That they have a responsibility as a teammate not to look the other way, but to seek help and to make sure.
It would also outline a process or procedure for those who are exiting the program, whether they're graduating from the university or for whatever reason they're dismissed or they choose to leave the team behind, that exit interview and what topics are to be covered, what information is to be gathered. Again, there are, of course, strict rules about gathering personal information and sharing any of that information, but those are important pieces of the big picture to consider. Again, we talked about resources. So there's academic resources that are included in there. There's student services. There's discussion of drugs and other illegal substances. Here, again, we're not talking about mandatory drug tests like many others athletic teams have. But instead here we mostly fill it with resources, reiterate state laws and university, codes that would involve things like illegal substance abuse, illegal drugs or substance abuse. And then again, that final page that's key is the acknowledgement of the handbook that they've received it and they understand its contents. And that is something you're going to want to collect and keep. One of the things that the university is very concerned with is press, social media. What are student athletes allowed to say and do on social media? How much discretion do you think that the managing and coaching staff has when it comes to those things?
Well, the managing and coaching staff is definitely responsible for helping to create the expectation within the group and the culture. And if there is a culture where it's okay to criticize your teammates when asked a question about them, then there'll be consequences from that cultural decision. So if that's something you don't want, maybe that's part of the training, and again, made available in the handbook, of when asked questions, compliment a teammate's play, but don't ever blame a teammate. Don't ever talk about they're not doing very well. Don't talk about their health. Players cannot, that's a football rule, but players are not allowed to talk about the health of one another.
Sure.
Right. But it also is really important that any restrictions in communication that you might give also be accompanied with maybe the right way to say things. You don't want to turn, you don't want to make them robots and give all the cliches, right? You want to be honest, you want to be forthright, but you also want to be complimentary and proactive. If that is what you want your culture to be, it just needs to be outlined.
And I think most athletic teams, at least football and basketball that I know of, they actually
they do classes.
Team rules, they have classes on it, but they also just prohibit most social media communications during the season, outside the season, except for the organized media events, which they receive instruction and coaching, and just like you said, it's more about honesty. It's more about saying things that you know about, what you feel about, and it's totally okay to say things like "I don't know" to a media-based question. But most of the time, those students sort of have the clamps put down on them as part of team rules. So I guess I would say it's up to the eSports coach and manager is to decide like how much of that they want to allow. In terms of communication. Obviously, with these players, most of them, their social media is just ubiquitous in their everyday life. This is something that they don't think twice about tweeting about how they did in last night's scrim. It'll be interesting to see how that works. And, of course, we're making a big deal out of this, but we would be surprised if any of these sort of negative events happen to you or your team. They certainly haven't happened here. It's more about precautionary. It's more about having a hierarchy and a structure in place that can address these concerns if inevitably something will arise.
It's another opportunity to teach about consequences and unintended consequences, and that as a person in a prominent, limited position, there's a greater expectation for those, what's the old line? Those with great power have great responsibility, something to that effect, right?
Well, that's from Spider-Man, I think.
Is that what it is?
That's
Maybe
Spider-Man.
So. I thought it was from Star
with
Trek.
Great power comes great responsibility. That's Peter Parker, I think, telling Aunt May.
I'm pretty sure that was Captain Pike to Scotty.
Was this a nerd test?
They went on a shuttle ride. Kobayashi Maru.
Kobayashi Maru. Again.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to mention on this topic again is that one of the advantages of having a structure like we have, where we have a head coach, you, more of a general manager position like me, is that I don't want to call it good cop, bad cop, but there's a way you can outline within the handbook the things that are taken care of through the coach and through the general manager. So, for instance, we recommend having like final roster decisions are always made by the general manager, and that takes the pressure off the head coach, and that he is now the facilitator. He works with things, he makes recommendations to those effects, but doesn't have to have the axe fall as
Right.
part of his responsibilities or her responsibilities, which I think frees you up in some way to be, what you are, what the
Yeah.
head coach duties
Mhm.
are, where you're worried about winning matches, about you're worried about strategy, you're worried about teaching, you're worried about those kinds of pieces of it, whereas the
I'm
final
not-
roster decisions can be
Eligibility, yeah.
shoveled off to a different person. So again, I think this is having a structure in place where there's multiple people involved in the hierarchy is much more advantageous than trying to have a single person do it all,
Right.
Even with small teams.
Yeah, it's true.
So what does the future hold for esports? Pull that crystal ball out of your bowling bag and take a look in there, and insert Harry Potter reference here, but try to figure out what's going to happen next. Like,
Well, I'm confunded by the Confundus charm for sure. No, I think we're going to see exponential growth in the number of schools that add esports over the next few years. I think
as officially recognized
sanctioned varsity programs.
And at what level they compete, or at what form of organization, what department they're going to place it in, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to see a lot more people or universities declare, for lack of a better word, that they have a varsity program.
Yes.
Sort of like how you declare bankruptcy.
Yes.
Bankruptcy.
I think we're also going to see a greater amount of control for a short time placed from publishers on how play can take place, competitive play can take place.
Definitely.
But I think those restrictions will loosen as schools basically
use the product.
Well,
they're using it. They want to use it the right way, and so I think there's a reshaping coming.
There is, but so I think that in the initial stages there'll be a limiting, characteristic, and then schools will start to play games that don't have those restrictions, and the marketplace will then readjust.
Absolutely. And
so,
I think it could adjust in a big way. Just yesterday I was asked again about a title we don't have because it is a shooter type game.
Yep.
I explained why our recommendation is to choose non-shooter type games.
Yeah.
And it made a lot of sense to them. And at the same time, they thought, well, these tournaments are still going to be going on because the popularity of these titles exists, and they're going to just operate outside the realm of varsity college programs.
Yep.
And I think that's true. I think that's in the offering as well. And we'll see how the marketplace will change. Will it embrace more types of fantasy violence versus
simulated violence?
Simulated violence, right? Change that by some. You know what I meant.
I know what you meant. Yeah, exactly. The interesting thing is that these other game titles are valuable, but they're also beholden to the marketplace. Nike and Adidas and Under Armour all are so heavily invested in colleges, not just for brand recognition, but to build loyal consumer bases over time, right? There's such a large number of universities and university students. These games rely on the same market principles as shoes do, because you build a loyalty within a universe, and you tend to use those. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a relaxing of some of these restrictions on maybe some of the bigger titles and how they can be played, especially as their comfort level with the broadcasting comes up. And they realize that they're into micro markets. Sorry, this is a lot of minutia.
So if you could narrow down your thoughts on titles and which titles are being selected, which titles are being played by universities 5 years from now, what would be your
I'll even go into just in general genres.
Okay.
We'll see more sports games.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
Major sports games, whether they be soccer, baseball, basketball, or football driven.
Mm-hmm.
We will see a continued interest in highly strategic MOBAs, massive online battle arenas, like League of Legends, like Heroes of the Storm, like Dota 2. It may be one of those, it may be multiples of those, but there'll always be that segment. I think that we're going to see increased interest in card-based games and other strategic card-based games like Hearthstone. Gwent is another one that's out there that could start getting more play. It's not under the same umbrella as, say, Hearthstone is. Action arcade games like Rocket League still have those. I think we're going to see more side-by-side fighting games, like more like a
Super
Street
Smash.
Fighter variety. I think we're going to see a few more of those as they rush in. And again, that's a good space to be in. And finally, I think we're going to see more squad-based fantasy combat games like Overwatch in prominence, but multiple titles of each of these.
Yeah, I'm not. So if I was to predict, I
Yeah.
would agree with you definitely on the games that mirror or closely mirror existing sports.
Yes.
Maybe even combination of those sports. I see increased interest in team-based activities rather than individual
Team,
play.
yes.
And I don't necessarily agree in my crystal ball about card play in those kinds of games. Rather, I think because I think for a wider audience, the action-oriented games draw a little bit better in terms of broadcasting. Also involve again seem to be more team-oriented and strategic-oriented. So I think you're going to see those kinds of games continue to rise to the top. Will there be changes atop that? Yes, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of commercial enterprises are trying to find the next big thing in college esports. I think that's going to be one of the big headlines, if you will, over the next few years about which games are gaining momentum, which games are waning, and for which reasons.
Yeah.
But I think if one thing I do really think is that if developers don't have an ear and design specifically toward the collegiate audience, they're going to be missing out.
Yes.
And I think the developers that aim specifically toward this particular field, that is going to be a game that grows quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry. I thought I was holding it off here. My cough drop. But the
Mute button.
yeah, to your point, yeah, and I would agree that the developers' involvement in this is super important. Games that are highly spectatable, that offer a spectator client replays, have all of these things built in, and many of the big companies are doing these things, are infinitely more attractive as an esport because they are about the storytelling. We don't view the game from the player's position exclusively. We have another view. And the games that allow and give many tools for that view are spectators.
Right. I would say I also predict an increase in complexity within games.
Yes.
That because it's going to make that upper echelon of players even more valuable.
Yep.
And so by making certain games that are even more complex to be and challenging to be really good at are going to gain in prominence.
Oh, and that does it for our fabulous interview this time. Did you pay for the pizza?
Yeah, that guy. He was adamant about getting the right pasta situation happening. It's not a pasta situation. I don't know what I'm talking about. Other future things.
There are going to be so many collegiate jobs in this. This is a highly specialized field, and like early in any big movement, there's a scramble for what we think is the talent.
Right.
But most of those people who are going to be really successful in this are current players, or they're in it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the word evolving sort of captures a lot of this. And so we can relate it to other sports that have gained more in popularity over the years. We haven't seen a ton of new sports enter the collegiate atmosphere in recent years the way it did maybe back 60, 70, 100 years ago, where there was a lot more interest in sort of starting new programs. This is really kind of one of those things that has come up out of nowhere, that is probably the newest of its kind. Like I said, so it's tough to compare, but I see everything is evolving. So I think coaching and managing will evolve. The amount of attention and money that universities and colleges put toward these programs will continue to evolve.
Yep.
Building of arenas and practice spaces,
Yeah.
those things will continue to evolve. The interest of sponsors. Everything right now is in a huge state of growth. It's difficult to see where that ceiling's going to be in terms of where the evolution will, start. That evolution curve will start flattening out again. But I think it's not coming that soon. I mean, we're talking about 10 years from now, the esports landscape will look way different. That we know.
Yes. But there will still be fans.
Yeah, did I say there wouldn't be fans?
No, it'll look very different, but there'll still be fans.
Absolutely. There's, as long as people are playing them.
Yeah.
And another question that often comes up is like, don't you think is this just a fad? The popularity of this. Well, was Pac-Man a fad? No. What was, Pong?
Yeah.
What started with Pong has evolved to this. It's tough to predict where this will evolve to, but we know that for the last 40 years, this has evolved to this stage.
Yeah.
I don't predict that it's going away anytime soon.
No. This is not
a matter of getting on board quickly, of getting organized quickly, and doing the right things, making the right decisions at the outset, in order to help your program evolve along with the market.
with a very kind of Lewis and Clark mentality of, you don't have a map, but you got to go in that direction. You get the best information that you can, but you just got to start.
Yeah, you're always thinking metaphor, aren't you?
Always.
Always. Going to relate this to something.
Yeah.
Nicely done. Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good.
And scene.